For our Bioexpo project, we wanted to delve deeper into a topic which had intrigued us all. This was a virus that was prominent in the news a few years ago, but then most of the hype died down. Given the opportunity, we were curious as to find out why. We looked into some traits of the virus, such as history, the virus on a molecular level, and the chance of a pandemic. To assist us on our research, we interviewed Jonathan Ronstadler from the University of Alaska. How do you diagnose the disease?
So we're identifying it with a molecular test from basically a fecal or an oral sample that we take from the bird. And then we also often try to grow that virus to get more of it so that we can characterize it more, so that we can learn more about the particular virus that might have been infecting that bird. It's sort of the same thing, right? But in humans, we've developed some more sophisticated tests for the particular viruses that seem to infect humans. But in general, you're doing the same thing. So if you think you have the flu and you go to the doctor's office, they'll probably get out a swab, and they'll take a swab of your nasal passages, or maybe your throat, and then they send that swab off to somebody who does the same kind of thing. Probably not a PCR test, but another test that's called a ELISA test. ELISA stands for enzyme-linked immunoabsorbent assay, and but essentially, they're doing the same thing. They're looking for evidence that the virus is there in the sample that was taken. That may not happen though if you go to the doctor. If you go to the doctor, that you may describe your symptoms, and they may diagnose you just from your description of how sick you've been and what whether you've been coughing a lot and those kind of. It would be very hard, in fact, I really say it's impossible for a doctor to classify it as one type of flu versus another. So they would have to collect samples and do tests to determine if you happen to be infected by an avian virus, let's say the avian flu H5N1 virus, as opposed to just one of the normal human influenza viruses that we have circulate every year. But they might have a reasonable shot of diagnosing, and I won't speak for MDs. I'm a BVM, but not an MD, so I'm not a doctor. But they might have a reasonable shot of diagnosing you with flu in general, depending on what had been happening in the community. So if they had seen a lot of patients with flu, in the last couple of weeks, and you come in and describe your symptoms, and they pretty well match, and you're in a group of people that would be likely to contract flu from other people who've had it, then they probably have a pretty good shot of diagnosing it.
How does it evolve over our history, and how does mixing with different animals, such as pigs, affect it?
Avian influenza really kind of hit a media storm around 2004, 2005. So I don't know if you guys remember that at all, but before that, you're right, it wasn't, in terms of influenza viruses in birds, we didn't really hear much at all, even though a few scientists had been basically researching influenza in birds since the 1960s anyway. It just wasn't much of a topic until it really hopped into humans, and we identified the H5N1 virus that started causing problems in Asia as a virus that came directly from birds. I think that's mostly a That's mostly a social media issue, as well as a science one to some extent. But in terms of the sort of public awareness, it's really a media issue because we do know that that birds have been carrying influenza virus for a long time, and so we've known that for a long time, and we've also known that it's potentially a threat for human health for a long time. But I think because nothing had really happened, it wasn't a public issue. And when something happened, it became a public issue.
How does the virus operate molecularly?
So the virus, like we said, is what's called an enveloped virus, and it's pretty simple, as a lot of viruses are. So it has these 8 segments, these 8 pieces of RNA. So our genomes are DNA. The standard dogma of molecular biology, or the basic principle, is that genomes are DNA, and then you make RNA, and from that RNA, proteins are made, and that's what makes up our bodies and everything. So these influenza viruses, instead of having DNA as their genomes, they have little pieces of RNA.